The latest in the case against Oxford High School shooter Ethan Crumbley. A judge has denied more of Crumbley's requests ahead of next week's Miller hearing. Judge Kwame Rowe denied the request to have security footage of the deadly mass shooting barred at the hearing. He will also allow pictures of the victims' bodies to be shown, as well as video of Crumbley torturing a bird. Crumbley, who pled guilty to killing 4 and injuring 7 others at Oxford High School in 2021, was also denied other requests earlier this week. Crumbley's Miller hearing is set for July 27th, where it will be determined if he gets a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Well, joining us now to talk in studio about this case in depth here is Vonda Evans, who spent more than 2 decades on the benches as a judge in Wayne County. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
And thank you for asking me.
So when you look at this case, it's obviously complicated because you're talking about somebody that was 15 years old at the time. When you look at what has been denied this week so far, does that lead you in any direction on how this judge will decide the sentence?
Not really. Under Miller, you cannot, Miller versus Alabama, you can't just give a juvenile natural life without first having a hearing. And basically, the hearing has to say, this person is not redeemable, they cannot be rehabilitated, they're done. There's several factors that you look at, the nature of the offenses, whether peer pressure, family, etc., and the brutality of it. But you have to balance that. What the people who represent him going to say, hey, you know what did you do at 15? Did you do something that's so bad that you are not now redeemable, that you can be rehabilitated? This is hard. It's a challenge. You're asking the judge to look in the future, in a crystal ball, and make those predictions.
But why would a judge, in a sense, want to have family members and others go through this again by having those pictures of the victims' bodies be shown, to have video of that deadly day at Oxford High School? Why would the judge want that to be allowed to be shown in court?
Obviously, it's very, terrible, and it evokes a lot of emotion. But it goes to show planning. It goes to show that he was a lone participant. And it goes to try to say, can we look at factors to predict, hey, maybe this guy doesn't need to be out. Maybe, he needs to be in prison for natural life. You have to weigh and balance it.
My thing is, we already know that, right? So we already know.
No, he doesn't have to. The judge can then say, listen, you know what? I'm not going to give him natural life. I'm going to give him 25 to 40 on the low end. So she can give him 40 to 60, 40 to 80, but she can't give them 50 to 100. So that's the range if she decides or he decides not to give them natural life.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you were the judge in this case,
okay,
how would you rule here? Because it's an incredibly hard decision. Some people would say, look, he did what he did. He was 15 at the time, but he deserves life without parole. Others will say, perhaps he can be rehabilitated and deserves a second chance. And there's going to be extreme opinions on either side. If you were the judge in this case, how would you go?
Well, unfortunately, I wish I could be, it was something that easily I can say. One of the things that I do believe is going to come out is going to be a mental health issue, okay? And the thing about it is that they're going to argue, listen, this young man needed mental help. He never got it. Let's try to give it to him and see what happens. This is a hard call, and that's why judges get paid the big bucks. They have access to more information than you or I have. We only know what they release, but it's a hard one, and I know that this judge is going to make the right decision. But there's even a case that's out of Oakland County now that says even 18-year-old, you got to look at it before you give natural life. So guess what? It's a challenge, but I know the judges is up to it.
As a former judge, what is the judge essentially going to be weighing here in that moment, in that courtroom?
Are the actions by him at 15 so egregious that we just throw them away and we say natural life and that's it? And Miller started talking about the development of the brain, that young people don't value things or they can't assess things the same way that an adult. It's like anything else. A 15-year-old versus a 20-year-old versus a 21. There's a line. But the immature brain has not completely developed. And that's what Miller was talking about. This is a hard call. There's going to be a lot of emotions. There are going to be a lot of witnesses, psychologists, etc. And it's going to be it's a lot. And you know what? People don't realize what goes into being a good judge, but this is a good judge, and I know that they'll come out with the right verdict. But guess what? this is going to be played out in the appellate court for years to come.
We're obviously discussing the Ethan Crumbley case as it goes to a Miller hearing next week. We're here with a former judge. And have you ever presided over a case that has been perhaps so difficult?
Anytime there's a loss of life, whether it's in the media or not, it's bad. There are no winners. You have the family of the deceased, you have the family of the defendant. There are no winners here. But you got to make a judgment call.
And there's justice, though.
Listen,
as hard as that is.
Exactly. And you have to make the right decision. What makes this even more challenging is the youthful age of this young man at the time that he committed it. So there are a lot of more factors than it would be if he were 17 or 8 or 19 or 20. It would be easy.
And when you see this situation here,
he has no prior criminal record, so that goes in his favor. So they're balancing. And you're asking the judge, let me look into the future and say, listen, this guy's not redeemable. But what we do is there's a presumption that over 19, 20, guess what? You commit a crime, you get natural life.
What are we looking at here? I mean, you're talking about potentially on the low end what it might be. Where does this range fall in? I mean, it's either obviously
25 to 40, low end. So the judge can say 40 to 80, which means that he would have to complete 40 years before he would be eligible for parole, which does not mean that he would be released.
Right.
Life without parole is a very extraordinary long, and it's a bad sentence. And there's a lot that goes into it. And that judge has to look at a lot of stuff. And the main thing is the development of the brain at the time of the commission of the crime, because juveniles access or process information a lot different than adults do.
Sure. And what have you seen over the years when you're talking about the development of a brain, when you're talking about somebody that is a teenager, that is young, that they have gone through a difficult thing? What have you seen in trials like this?
You know what? Ask yourself, what difference did you make at 15 till now? It's very simple. At 15, you're very impressionable. That's why peer pressure is one of the things that they look at, because young minds are very susceptible to peer pressure. They may not have received any mental health treatment. The killing of the bird, goes both ways. Hey, he was crying out. He needed help and nobody listened. His family wasn't there. Let's try to rehabilitate him by giving him some type of meaningful counseling, and that hopefully one day he can be out. That is going to be the goal of the defense. And this is going to play out probably to the United States Supreme Court.
What is the difference in a situation like this where a teen is charged as a juvenile or charged as an adult?
What's the difference? Okay, well, when you have a child or a young person, they can hold them to 21, and then they can do other hearings to determine. They can do up to 21 in juvenile sentence system. They can give them what's called a blended sentence, a little in juvenile and a little in adult, and or they can give them a sentence as an adult. This is a sentence as an adult, natural life, or any terms of years from 25 to 40. You don't give juveniles that. So if a juvenile had committed this crime and they were being sentenced in juvenile court, they cannot receive 25 to 40 unless there's a blended sentence. And that means that case is actually going to be decided in the circuit court, not just the juvenile court.
As a former judge, would you have liked to see anything different in a case like this?
Well, you know what? Time and time again, I hope that this case showcases we need to start early, give our young people mental health treatment. They're crying out for it. And parents need to realize there's nothing wrong when you see your child acting a little, confused. Get them some help. This is the elephant in the room we got to identify. Maybe if someone had given this child mental health help when he was suffering, going through this, maybe this might have not happened. We got to identify the elephant in the room, because if we don't, we're going to end up in situations that are horrific like this, and then we're going to try to look into a crystal ball to determine, is this person rehabilitated, and it's easier, in my opinion, to do it before it happens than after.
All right, former Judge Yvonda Evans, we appreciate it. We're going to continue this conversation when we come back after the break.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's been a better time to start a brand new news operation.
The newsroom was pretty much starting from scratch.
It's fresh, it's innovative.
Lots of energy, lots of passionate reporters.
Knowing what we're starting here puts so much joy in my heart.
We have reporters who are embedded in these communities.
We are part of the neighborhood. Our newsroom is part of your neighborhood.
Telling the stories that otherwise nobody would know about.
Now, AJ, you went to the downtown boxing gym and you really got to see how this gym is impacting kids' lives.
Yeah, Chris. As soon as I walked in the building, it was very uplifting.
It's a boxing gym, but it's more than boxing. You know, we do homework. We help them with the SAT.
When it comes to the weather, it's forecasting what's going to fall on your driveway, when is it going to happen, and how might it actually affect your day-to-day life.
Hundreds of people continue to call in reporting problems throughout the county.
Cleanup crews working all throughout Metro Detroit.
Get them down and get them cleaned up.
Local news to me means we're in your community, we're telling stories that matter to you, that affect you.
Well, we are rethinking the way local news is done in the 21st century and how to tell the most important stories in a compelling way.
Local news is all about letting people know what's happening in their community.
We're here to listen and actually hear what you're saying, and we're putting together a newscast that will show that.
I want to tell those people's stories because it's needed. Detroit is ready. Get ready, because here we come.
You're watching CBS News Detroit.
Welcome back. Judge Vonda Evans still with us as we continue this conversation about the latest in the Ethan Crumbley case. And when you look at the situation compared to what happened in Texas at Uvalde, what is the difference here when you're talking about the two different individuals?
Well, I think that in the Crumbley case that there was definitely a cry for help. And the parents, because they're being charged, were not willing to say, you know, what's going on with our son? You know, like many parents, you know, you think that you're a failure if your child has a challenge with some type of mental health. It doesn't have anything with you being a failure because it happens. It has a lot to do with you being a failure to not get someone treatment. Time and time again. What they're saying here, and that's why the parents are charged, you didn't act early enough, and that you were more concerned about, social things like, you know, giving them a gun and letting them be on Facebook and being macho than you were to determine and to see about his mental health.
You bring up an interesting point about the parents here. It's unprecedented. They're charged with involuntary manslaughter, and what they are facing now in court. When you look at the parents, I mean, how responsible, in your opinion, are the parents here? Well, you know what? It's a challenging thing. The parent is the one that actually got him the gun. Correct. And the parents they had a deaf ear. When you are a parent, you have to listen to what your child says, and you have to listen to what they do. You have to be observant. Does that automatically necessitate them being charged with a crime? Well, guess what? A jury will determine that. But what it does is it tells these parents, stop being so preoccupied with your child assimilating into culture and being macho and bravado, and say, listen, is my daughter or my son crying out by doing things that are inappropriate? Let me monitor them. You know, that's why they're children. They need to be monitored by their parents. Well, it seems as if the parents are on the hook here. They're charged with involuntary manslaughter, but the school, which they saw obviously signs as well, seems as if that they can't be held responsible. Well, there was a ruling that was held that we have what's called immunity. And there was a ruling by the judge that immunity applied and they could not be sued. The school board could not. What they're looking at, the young man, the parents gave him the gun. There was inappropriate behavior with the young man, and it was told to the family, and they just kind of brushed it off like, oh, it's no big deal. Boys will be boys. But it was more than that. Right. So where do you see this going with the parents? Do you think they should be charged with involuntary manslaughter, and do you think they should face serious time here because he said they bought him the gun? Well, you know what? This is a hard call. I don't have enough information, but let me say this to you. It makes it hard to be a parent
Because anytime that a child,
but giving a gun to a
that's
15-year-old
bad.
is
That's bad. But
that has dealt with, obviously, is having some issues.
Also, it's a cultural thing. You have people who hunt, who say, let's go hunting. You know what I'm saying? Up north, let's do this. It's hard. I don't know if you're a parent, but listen, let me tell you something. It's hard. It was hard for me raising my children, and you don't even know what you'll do, let alone your kids will do. So you know what? It's a hard one. And you know what? I want to see what that jury is going to say. I wouldn't be surprised if it might be a not guilty.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we saw Ethan Crumbley, essentially turning on his parents in court, pleading guilty, saying the parents gave him the gun there, and almost a cry for help. Let's go back to the Ethan Crumbley case for a second, talking about the Miller hearing coming up. This judge is known for being fair. What do you think this judge is going to decide here?
I really can't say, but let me just say this to you. When you have a person and you send them to prison, one day is a long time, let alone 25 to 50. 30 to 60, 40 to 80. That's a long time.
What's the precedent set here in similar cases?
Well, because now after Miller, it's very rare that judges will say natural life. They can give them anywhere from 25 to 40. So, to give them 40 to 60 may be enough. Then the parole board has to determine when they do the minimum, is that sufficient? They could easily give them 40 to 80 and they'll die in prison.
Sure, and when you see this in prior situations, you're saying you don't see a lot where it's life without parole?
No, not for someone that young. Because what they have to do is basically say, you know what, here's a person who has no criminal record. He did an atrocious thing. It was horrific. But can he be rehabilitated? And I think that when you look at that, and this person has done one serious, terrible act, there's no excuse for this. Should he be punished? Yes. But is there a chance for rehabilitation? These young children that were killed, they don't have a chance. Their lives are over.
No, and I would contest that the parents don't need to see that video again. You know what happened, and to make this call, again, I'm not a judge, but to make this call in the sentencing hearing coming up this week, you know what happened. We've seen enough to see the victims' bodies. I think it's a little harsh.
But you have to balance that.
For the parents.
Right.
I think of those parents, those poor parents.
Definitely.
That have to go through, and the 7 others that were wounded, obviously, in this awful, deadly mass shooting at Oxford High School a few years ago.
But as the prosecutor, they're pointing certain things out when they're showing it. They're showing how close they were to the body. They're showing how each body, how far they're away from each other, to show that there was premeditation, deliberation, that he went from one person to the next person, reloaded, etc. They're not doing it so that it would cause sadness. We know that. They're doing it to show premeditation, deliberation, that he was aware of what he was doing, that he continued to do it, and they're showing it for the evidentiary. Clearly, they're not showing it to invoke some type of a passion or anger or sadness. That's not what the purpose is. But anytime that you put up a body, the prosecutor, they're trying to show from that body or from how the distance of the body that there was premeditation, deliberation, that he continued on despite knowing that he had killed people, shot people, he continued on. So they're doing it from an evidentiary value. You got to balance it.
The last thing I want to ask you is about the torturing of the bird video. Why is that relevant here?
Well, it cuts both ways. And it cuts both ways from the defense, hey, he was a cry for help. From the prosecution, there's studies that show that if you harm an animal, you're more likely to not be able to be rehabilitated than you are. And there are cases that talk about that, and there are studies as well.
Well, Vonda Evans, former judge in Oakland County.
Wayne County.
Wayne County, excuse me. In Wayne County, we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for talking about this very, very difficult case.
And you know what? I pray for everybody. The families involved. It's really terrible. But I know the judge is going to do the right thing. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you so much.